Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to have this session start. I hope you can see my slides okay. Hopefully somebody will let me know if you can't. Here to talk about data and culture, at least from my perspective at the JR Simplot Company. So in order of a quick introduction, my name is Greg Hanmer. As mentioned, I'm a Senior Director of Information Management and Analytics. Been here at the JR Simplot Company for the past 7 years. Been in the industry, the IT industry, for the past 36 years, which means I'm not a young man. You can see my email there. I'd be happy to connect with any of you on LinkedIn, or if you want to send me an email. And then you can see the logos of some of the companies that I've spent time with. When I started talking to Jay Larson about this presentation, 2 words came to mind, and I think they're synonymous with the JR Simplot Company culture, and it was humble and curious, and mostly humble, because I thought, who am I to tell this story of data and culture? We have a long way to go, and we're very humble about where we are. But I think that probably a lot of us, especially a lot of us that work in the data space, feel that same way. But data is hard to understand. It's hard for people to grasp. There's no start and stop date on data. It's constantly changing. We're acquiring new data and consuming data every day, and it requires investment. And so, I know that we have to educate every day people in the business about these concepts around data. Data takes discipline. At the JR Simplot Company, also, we have a very deep experiential culture. So we have long tenured employees that are really good at their craft. And that's fantastic, but sometimes can get in the way in terms of introducing analytics and data in decision making. As mentioned, I feel like from our team's perspective, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And I put that graphic in there very intentionally, that we're climbing this mountain, and seldom do we stop and look back down and look how far we've come. We always keep looking up, and we have such a long way to go, but we have come a long way as well. And that's true for all of you as well. And then it always looks worse when you're inside of it. And I'm reminded of a story while I was at Hewlett Packard. I was in the clean room when we were merging with Compaq, and there was an executive sponsor from HP, and there was an executive VP sponsor from Compaq that served as our leads. And the HP gentleman had been at HP for over 30 years at the time. Was a gentleman named Webb McKinney, and he was a great storyteller. And one of the stories he told was of a time at the headquarter building in Palo Alto, I think around 1967. Then he picked up a Forbes magazine, and it was the first time that HP had been named best managed company on the cover of Forbes. Then he brought it to work, and he saw Bill and Dave, the founders of the company, in the hallway, and they were all looking at the magazine. And Webb's description was, this crusty old engineer came along and said, "What are you guys doing?" And it was Bill or Dave handed him the magazine, and this engineer looked at the magazine cover, looked up at them, looked at the magazine cover, looked up at them, and then finally said, "God, can you imagine how effed up the other guys must be?" It always looks worse when you're inside of it. And as I talk to other people and I'm feeling humble about where we're at, I realize, well, we've come a long way too. And again, I think you all have as well. And if you've come here expecting all the answers, then we could end the session now. I certainly don't have all the answers. But hopefully we can share what we have learned. So just a little bit about the company itself, the JR Simplot Company. Our founder is Jack Simplot, as probably most are aware. He was a true entrepreneur in every sense of the word. He left school in the 8th grade, started buying hogs and selling hogs, and needed to feed the hogs, and planted potatoes. And you've probably heard the story, but an incredible leader. He passed away in 2008 at the age of 99, and I remember reading something to the effect of his last words were to his wife, or something like, "Grab my hat, I need to get into the office." Not a week goes by that I'm not in a meeting where I hear somebody refer to Mr. Simplot. So his stories and his presence still live large. And also the Simplot family are very involved in the company and care about our mission, our customers, and our employees. We have about 13,000 employees worldwide, annual revenues of around $6 billion. We're headquartered here in Boise, Idaho. And hopefully for those of you who live in Boise, you've seen our beautiful building downtown by Jump. We also have a campus in Melbourne, Australia. Our food businesses, we produce over 3 billion pounds of potato products a year, which is an amazing amount of potatoes when you think about that. We pioneered the frozen French fry in the late 1940s and early 50s. And we have manufacturing facilities in the US, Canada, Mexico, Australia, China, and Argentina. Our agribusiness, we're the largest phosphate producer in the West. We have phosphate mines and production there. We have more than 230 retail stores. So these are stores that we sell fertilizer and other nutrients and things for the growers, products for growers, and also services to help them improve yields and things. We're also one of the largest suppliers of nutrients for turf and nurseries. We also, Simplot owns a lot of land. So we have 15 ranches in the Western US, 37 working farms. These are Simplot owned farms. And we're the West's largest beef cattle producer with feedlots in Idaho and Washington. And then finally, our plant sciences and animal sciences divisions are leading innovations in biotechnology, animal reproductive solutions, and food sciences. And if you've driven by the building here in Boise, you'll notice a greenhouse on the top part of the building, I think along 9th Street. And there's a lot of science going on in there. You know, it's not just, it looks pretty, but it's not just for the looks. There's a lot of science happening every day in that area. In terms of the organization, the way it's structured, we have a North America food group. So this is, you won't see a Simplot branded bag of fries in the local Albertsons. They're very B2B oriented. We produce and sell frozen potato products, also frozen vegetable products. Next to that, we have, I mentioned Melbourne, Australia. We have an Asia Pacific food group business that has a lot of similarities in terms of selling to businesses, to restaurants, and to food chains. But in this case, they're also a very large retail presence in New Zealand and Australia, owning 6 of the top 10 brands in Australia. And beyond vegetables and potatoes, also get into pasta sauces and also fish, frozen fish, the John West tuna brand. Agribusiness, as mentioned, is our phosphate mines and production, as well as Grower Solutions, which is the retail business there, and Simplot Partners. Land and livestock, our folks there look after all of our cattle and our farms and land. And then the last two, as I mentioned, these are the innovation mentioned at the last of the previous slide there, Simplot Plant Sciences and our Animal Sciences division. And at the bottom, a couple of key points I wanted to raise. J.R. Simplot had a great saying sometime in the past where he said, "Give a man a rig and let him run it," which is very empowering. But I think over time, at least my perspective is that saying might have gone awry a little bit, where it was sort of like everybody do whatever you want to do in some cases. And so that's a presence and part of our culture for sure. We have a very diverse portfolio of businesses. J.R. Simplot was a genius. In some cases, these businesses are counter-cyclical, so the company weathers different economic situations very well. And over time, these businesses are very incentivized to make their business successful, which again is not a bad thing. But it can. There's a limit to that, I suppose. And then the last thing, and the most interesting thing from my perspective, being a data geek that I am, is it's got this incredibly integrated value chain. So, J.R. Simplot would buy, like we say, from dirt to dinner plate, right? We own the entire value chain of bringing food to people. And personally, I've never seen anything like that. And from a data geek's perspective, it's just a treasure trove of data along that value chain, since Simplot owns the entire thing. There are changes underfoot and underway currently at the J.R. Simplot Company. And the way I would sort of categorize it, we're moving away from just having that focus of optimizing one business, even if it possibly at the expense of others. Trying to move away from this high degree of customization. We have a very fragmented IT environment, and that's because each business has kind of been running their own rig. And so we've done a lot to customize and optimize just for each of those businesses, which has created a little bit of urban sprawl when you think about our technology landscape. We trust gut feel, which again is a good thing to a limit. And then in the past, decisions are made on the boots on the ground, and that's very empowering as well. But at the same time, we weren't always taken into consideration the longer term effects or other effects of making those changes. But the changes that are coming, and they're underway now, is we have, not a week goes by, you won't hear our CEO, Garrett Lofto, use the phrase one Simplot. And it's more than a mindset. It is a mindset, but it's also a set of actions where we're seeing these businesses work together, look for leverage, more than I've ever seen it in my 7 years at the company. We're also seeing a change a little bit with the culture, and maybe even a generational change with the workforce, where we still have this experiential culture, which and hopefully we always will. It's very important to the company, but we're infusing this data-driven and analytics piece to that to inform those gut feel decisions. We're also putting more focus on change management and process discipline, having people in roles that are just focused on that. And as mentioned previously, empowering people at the lowest level to make decisions, but also having oversight of those to make sure that these decisions for any customizations don't have any kind of roll-on effects that are undesirable. So with that, I'll start kind of into our data journey, at least the when I joined this data journey. And BI, business intelligence, is relatively new at the company still. Our CIO, before I joined in 2013, started really kind of packaging up a value proposition around this. He knew we needed to get started on it. And so there were kind of some fits and starts probably in 2013 along this way. I was hired in early January of 2014 and assembled a team, and we had a small team, a staff of about 8 people. We really did feel like a little startup. At the time, there was the business intelligence practice, this little upstart, and then there was a more tried and true small team around operations research, doing optimization of models and things. And one of the things I pitched is, taking that operations research team and starting to shape it more into a data science practice. We weren't well received in IT, and in some cases we really weren't well understood. In all cases, we weren't well understood. In some cases, we weren't well received by IT. I think some people viewed it as a threat to them, and so we had a lot of work to do there. And we had this super cool name as an organization, which I had nothing to do with, was Advanced Analytics and Intelligence, which got a few of my friends' eyes as I changed my title on LinkedIn. As I kind of got the lay of the land, looking around, some of the things that I observed is there was a large development team, a very flat organization structure. We weren't part of that at the time, but in the middle of that big development team were these people that were always referred to as the DBAs. And the interesting thing is, as I learned more, I realized they weren't database administrators at all. They were database developers, and they were very powerful. I kind of affectionately call them the wolf pack back then, because everything ran through and across their desk. We were the outsiders. The BI team was definitely the outsiders. And my office at the time was situated by the front door, and I'll never forget it. One of the wonderful analysts on the team, I'd see her walk in, and she had a pie, and I thought, well, that was nice. She baked a pie to bring into work. But then I'd see her again another day, and she'd have another pie, and on and on and on. And finally, I asked her about it, and what she was doing was using pie to get access to data at the time, which I found very curious. But it's sort of indicative of where we were at that time. And so, right or wrong, probably more wrong than right. Every time we got access to data through this pie, we started just going underground and building our own data warehouse based on Kimball methodology. So one pie at a time, we were starting to really contribute right back to the problem of this fragmented environment that we were living in. Within the first month, I'll never forget a moment I sat. At the time, a lot of our corporate employees were in the CenturyLink building, for those familiar with Boise. And I sat across the desk from the president of agribusiness and started introducing myself and talking about business intelligence. And his reply was something to the effect of, when I saw the increased IT allocation for this business intelligence thing, it pissed me off. It made him mad. And because he saw it as an increased cost to his business, and he had no concept really of what business intelligence was about or how it could be valuable to his organization. And it was a real pucker moment for me personally. But it was an important moment because I realized that we really had a lot of educating to do. And we needed to get the message across about our value proposition and how introducing analytics can be a differentiator for the business. At the time, what we'd hear is we just need a report. And people were almost more fixated on the font type and the heading, layout than they were about the questions they were trying to answer with data. And clearly we were an organization stuck at descriptive analytics. And there was, I can't remember who said it, but I used it often back then. There was a saying that stuck with me forever. That is, there's a reason the windshield's bigger than the rearview mirror. Descriptive analytics are necessary, but it would be great to start getting data and a perspective more that's betting our future. So we knew we had a challenge ahead. And I talked a lot at the time to the team about we've got to create virtuous cycles. We were the first agile delivery team given permission to be the first agile team in Simplot technology. We had a wonderful agile coach at the time, since it was new to many of us. And we started about teaching people in the business and in IT about, and ourselves, about agile, and also about this new kind of emerging role and a critical role for us, this product owner role that many of you, I'm sure, know or maybe even are fulfilling today in your role. And we set out to start delivering in these agile sprint cycles. And one of the first places we went to is the cattle ranch in Grandview, Idaho, working with the head vet out there, who's an incredibly smart individual. And as we delivered the solution, we heard three things that would come up in a lot of our delivery, and it just sort of stuck with me. And those three things were, one, once you see it, it's like, wow, I didn't know we could do this. And then the second thing was, boy, this data sure is crappy, because before they weren't using the data to make those kinds of decisions. Once you start doing that, you value the data more, and you start realizing that you probably could put more work into the quality of that data a little bit more. And then the last thing, which was fantastic, was now that I've seen this, I have some ideas of other things we could do. It introduced us to the fact that this is, this work in data is very discovery-driven work. Again, it doesn't always have a clean start and stop date. And this was the mission we went on, and the cycle would continue. And the thing that we also noticed is, I put in here, well, Idaho isn't a show-me state. It would take somebody in a different business or a different function leaning over and seeing a business user, working against a dashboard that we help them develop with the data models underneath it, and they'd be like, I want one too. And so all of this, all these virtuous cycles started building. There was a snowball effect that really started picking up and building steam, and building our confidence that we could make a difference in the company. But it's almost like that success created a problem. It was a moment where I realized, kind of, hello, Houston, we have a problem. And as mentioned, we have an EDW, we have something we call an enterprise data warehouse, but it really is not that at all. It has grown up over the past 20 years. It grew up like the company grew up, by line of business. So it's a series of data marts more than a cohesive data warehouse. And I remember that the underground warehouse I talked about, we were contributing to the problem as well. We were getting crushed by our own technical debt, and things just took too long for us. And if you can see the graphic, hopefully, and squint at it a little bit, you see a lot of red lines there. And those are kind of representations of bridges to nowhere. Just over time, things that have changed, and you end up with a bunch of technical debt out there that you in no way go back and just clean up without stopping everything else you're doing. We also had a large ERP consolidation underway at this time. We paused that for a bit with the pandemic, but we recognized that there's a real challenge in terms of how do we preserve our historical data and stitch that together with this new data as this ERP comes online. And this EDW would not be the place we'd want to do that. And then finally, with the concept and this introduction of One Simplot, we were standing in a hole here with this platform. It was not intended to be a One Simplot platform. It wasn't designed to be. Nobody asked for that at the time. And so we had a real moment where we knew that we had a problem in terms of our future moving forward. And with that, we started building a case for something we call the Simplot Data Platform. And basically, we asked for permission to reimagine the data infrastructure at the GR Simplot Company. And by this time, we had enough proof points that people could see the value in the data and the analytics on top of the data. And so it still wasn't easy. I call this period our groundhog period. We went round and round, even with my own boss at the time, trying to outline the importance of what we wanted to do here and why we wanted it. We needed funding to do it. But we finally did receive the go-ahead to start on this about a year and a half ago. And one of the things that I did, even as a group of data geeks in IT, we knew the branding would be important and the marketing would be important. And so we hired a graphic artist who came up with this graphic, which I love in terms of its representation of how data works and kind of liking it to a plant. And I tasked my team with coming up with a slogan. And the one that there were a lot of terrible slogans. It was clear we didn't have a lot of marketers in our group, but the one that really resonated with me was this Simplot data platform, bringing Simplot's data to life. And it mirrors off of our principle of bringing Earth's resources to life as a company. But the words behind that also, the engineer who came up with it, likened it to planting crops. That you've got to care for the soil, you got to cultivate the soil, you got to plant the seeds, you've got to water them, you've got to provide nutrients. It's this care and feeding that's so similar to data. And so we set off to build this new platform. The new platform that we imagined in our building at a very high level is this one. And if you look at the very bottom of the slide, you'll see the spectrum of analytics, from descriptive to prescriptive, and kind of the way we view these different data assets in the middle in terms of their capability. As I mentioned at the time, we were embarking, and we will continue to embark on an ERP built on SAP technology. So that represents the far left. And obviously you want enough data there to run the business, but you don't want too much in terms of bogging down performance, et cetera. And so to the right of that is what we labeled the Simplot data platform. And it consists of 3 data properties. Enterprise HANA, we honestly don't have a good use case for that yet, but we imagine there will be some SAP native data that's complicated enough in terms of the joins that you won't want that tax or that burden on the transactional system. And so we would do it there. To the right of that is Simplot Data Warehouse. This is well underway. This is being built now for complex analytics and data mashups, keeping the historical data here. We have stitched together some. We have a SAP instance for our international business. So we have stitched together some of our legacy ERP data with the SAP data here as a proof point. And so this is a place where all Simplot data can come together. And we're building this on Microsoft SQL Server. And then finally, the data lake. And we are just underway with this. We considered it sort of important and not urgent, waiting for the use case. And you can see we knew we had things with commercial digital, our agronomy research, smart manufacturing that would introduce data that's big data, the 3V kinds of data, sensor data, different types of data. We do now have some initiatives underway, so the urgency is ratcheting up a bit. So when you look at those 3 data assets, you see the red box around it. That's what we call Simplot Data Platform. And at the very top, you'll see the questions that we envision being answered by these different data assets below. Everything from, what's my inventory on this given day at this moment from the transactional system. There'll be great in-context reporting for that, all the way over to the right with Data Lake that's trying to do correlations between medical treatments for cattle and weather, and everything in between, all represented here. And all these things tied together by the gold arrow there, which is a semantic model. So, making sure that we're modeling data in business-friendly terms, with standard calculations, in ways that the business can consume and understand the data more easily than they always have been in the past. We also talked about the way we work, and so we spent time on our operating model as an information management and analytics team, and we've dubbed it the data pipeline. And while I was doing research on this, I ran across an article from Peter Drucker that you see quoted there, where he said, "Information is data endowed with relevance and purpose." And it really resonated with me. It kind of goes back to that concept of data is hard, and it's hard to understand. And we can be data rich and information poor. A lot of us are. And so it just represented that, there's this additive investment in data to turn it into information. And that's kind of represented in our operating model. And I'll start at the left with the source systems. And just something as simple as data quality starts here. It sounds obvious, but over time, I think we've gotten to the point where in our old EDW, we'd build filters and screens and hoops and chutes and things to account for data quality issues coming from other transactional systems, rather than go back and have the conversation of how can we just not have those data quality issues in the first place. And so that's the starting point of the change with our operating model. From there, we need to source and land data. from a variety of different source systems. And that's our data acquisition and integration and master data section. And so we want a standardized way of pulling data in there, storing it in an operational data store, having change data capture, which just is a fancy term for keeping the data synchronized with these transactional systems that are always changing, grabbing the data at the lowest level, applying some data quality rules to that data, grabbing metadata, so the data about the data, and storing it here. And so at this stage, we consider the data raw. From there, we pull it forward into this data prep and modeling phase. And this is where we have people with a real business process mindset. Even though they're in IT, they're working with the business. This is where we do our data warehousing work now. We are using Kimball methodology. We focus, as I mentioned, a lot on the semantic layer. So rather than have everybody come up with net sales as a calculation, we'll do that once and have that in our semantic layer. We'll have friendly terms in that semantic layer so people can understand it. We'll do joins in the semantic layer so that the data is easily combined to make it as easy as possible to work with. So, at this stage, we talk about the data being conformed. The next box is really where you start extracting value. So the information value realization. And the way I think about this is now that the data is modeled, it's along business process lines, you can now set services on the data, whether those are dashboards or machine learning models or what B2B workflows, whatever those are, that's where the services are set on the data. And that's really where the value is extracted. And at the very bottom, you can see that this concept of data usefulness to the business goes from probably quite low to the left side to very high on the right side. And so it's the relevance and purpose piece. And we do all of this for the last box, which is to support information consumption. And we're really working hard to have information easily consumed by the business, to allow them to self-serve on this data and to build their own dashboards and present the data in a way that makes sense to them and to their business peers and their customers. And we see a couple of the personas here as represented here as these power users or explorers, people that, and you can see them today in the company where they're having an immersive experience with the data. It's fun to watch because they just turn into storytellers, but they're using data to tell the story, clicking through and over and asking, why did SG&A go up in this region, and clicking in there and looking at seasonality and hiring that's gone on and the different reasons for that. And so it's quite contagious. It's fun to watch. The next persona, and we'll always have these, I think, at the company, is these information consumers, more casual consumers of information, and they just want information pushed to them. And so it needs to be repeatable. It needs to be delivered to them in whatever fashion makes sense. And then, these are the more static kinds of data. Maybe it is a report that they're getting from there. And then finally, in some cases, we provision data for our other delivery teams, our application delivery teams, or third parties or customers for the company. And so that's the pipeline that we work across. We execute this day in and day out, and it's starting to really mature. We also had to think about the way we organize and have a new way of working. And you'll see the acronym POR on this, or abbreviation, and it stands for Plan of Record. And as an IT group, we're very connected to a plan of record. So just a series of projects that are prioritized. And the plight we fell into was that from a data perspective, we would just get a little data request to support a project, and we would fulfill that. But I always refer to it as a spot weld. If we just are grabbing just that little bit of data that we needed to support that project, we're missing a broader opportunity, probably for Simplot. And two, we're just rebuilding what I call the Winchester Mystery House. There's not a rhyme or reason about how you're storing the data in something like an EDW at that stage. But it is important. It's needed for these projects to move that capability forward. So as we struggled with this, as an entire IT organization, we came up with this cute concept called spud teams. And spud stands for Simplot Product Unified Delivery Team. And so it's the concept here is you have people together that get to know each other very well, have real good skill set together that's needed, and then you bring work to them rather than just bringing people to work. And so in this concept and construct, we have our spud teams oriented around the lines of business that I've described before. And then each one of them has a steering committee that's represented by the little funnel at the top, where they do the prioritization. That's where the product owner lives, that sets the pace for our teams to do the delivery. And so all that prioritization drops in those funnels. And the way we rationalize it is the box in the middle, this architecturally driven team that's focused on Simplot Data Platform. And so if Food Group, as an example, wants to do something for demand planning, we'll, by the time it gets down to the center part there, we'll think about demand planning. Well, that involves inventory. So how can we start pulling inventory data and modeling it, not just for Food Group, but for the entire business? And so we manage this tension between, getting these plan of record projects done and doing it in an architecturally sound way so that we can move away from this urban sprawl that I talked about before into more of a planned community kind of approach as we build out Simplot Data Platform. And I have to say, this is starting to really work well. We're getting good engagement with the business. These steering committees are working very well and maturing and making the trade-offs needed. And in some cases, we'll push back and ask for a different way of doing that just to keep working on models that don't just support one project or one business, but also one Simplot. So where are we now? I kind of pasted in a couple of dashboards. It's very common now as you walk around the company, walk around the headquarters building, and you just see all these dashboards up on screens, or maybe on a TV screen, you see a dashboard in front of a whole department of folks. It's clearly caught on. People are, working. In this case, you see one around executive transportation spend. There's one around the SNLP process for our food business. I think the third one is around some sales forecasting in our land and livestock business. And so it's definitely catching on. It's definitely catching fire. It's definitely gaining momentum. And at the bottom, when we talked a lot about the spectrum of analytics, I always kind of joked that, Simplot is a very conservative company. And so when we were forming the data science team, and we thought about, what can we do from a more predictive and prescriptive standpoint? My joke was always, Simplot, nobody at the Simplot company is going to use the I feel lucky button on Google. But we did a proof of concept in one of our factories where we were looking at product quality, and this particular factory has a lot of sensors collecting data about a lot of things. And so we created some machine learning models on that, and we're able to come in within like a 3 or 5% error rate of predicting what the defect rate would look like at the end of the assembly process. So 35 minutes ahead of where we were analyzing the data, and within this place, that the feedback I got from the vice president here was, hey, if we can prove this out, I'd be fine with you, because we had a good idea of what was causing the defects. Maybe it's a setting on a blancher or a different piece of equipment there. And he really, his desire was to get to the point where we could actually automatically change the settings of that based on this analysis. So we're definitely seeing an uptick in the appetite and the interest in this kind of work, which is fantastic. And it's also impacted us, I think, as an IT organization, as an information management and analytics organization. And this is probably true for a lot of people that work in IT. It's this sort of cobbler's children have no shoes syndrome. We don't invest in ourselves. And so we are as much a problem about the Wild West of our infrastructure as anybody. And so now we have this concept of BIing the BI team, where we're starting to think about a lot of data. How can we start collecting data and have graphics on top of that about what data is being used in the company and by whom and how frequently? What reports are being used? How many Power BI models have been created and maybe not used or used a lot? And so we can start seeing, like, maybe there's a model out there that somebody produced and just for a couple people in their department, but now it's being used by a number of folks. How can we reach out and help them and sort of stand that up and make it a more scalable, if that's the case? We're also, as mentioned, we're preventing the Wild West, or trying to get in front of that. And I also, I mentioned the 8-person team at the beginning with this little startup. We now, here in 2017, have 51 people in the information management analytics team. And not all of that's just organic growth. Some of it's changing the organization and pulling like roles together. But some of it is actual just growth. And again, which speaks to the value that the team's adding and the visibility it's gaining in the company. And also another great sign, I think, of the maturity at Simplot is there's now a sister organization that's focused on data quality and data governance. And it's unbelievable having them there. So they're creating the right data stewards and things like that. So the maturity at the company is growing. Our culture is ever so slightly shifting to blend, to make an and both of our experiential culture and our data-driven culture. And the appetite's just increasing for this kind of work. So with that, that's what I had to present today. I really appreciate your interest and your time, and hope you have a great rest of the day. And like I said, if you want to reach out to me, I would love that. Thank you very much.